What's the Okay. Good morning, everyone. Derek Cobb, CTO for the London Internet Exchange Links. As Dave said, I'm here today to tell you about the change out to our primary peering LAN last year, which was the first Juniper Internet Exchange. So just in terms of a running order, first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about Links, where we were before the Juniper migration. A few details on the new architecture, the selection process through the RFQ and the contract that we signed with Juniper, how we went through the design process, the program for testing and deployment and migration, a few lessons that we learnt about ourselves on the way, and hopefully on a slightly light-hearted finale, some war stories, things that just went wrong along the way that we had to overcome. So first of all, about Links, we've got a dual mission. We're an IX, so not surprisingly, we facilitate internet interconnection in the UK, especially through private peering, but we run public peering, I should say, but we run private peering as well. We also represent our members' interests through a public policy team, which acts within the UK and also within Europe as well. We do that as a neutral, mutually owned membership association. We're owned by around 400 members who elect a council that runs Links, and I'm part of the engineering and management team that run that day to day. And those 400 members come from around 50 countries from around the world, as you can see on this beautifully coloured map. This shows you that we're not just in the UK, and in fact, as we're in North America, you can see that our second largest collection of members actually comes from North America itself. The geography of Links, just for those of you who don't know London, we're at sort of four major collections of colo sites across London. The major collection is the Docklands area to the east of the City of London, where we have a number of sites, but we have further sites going out towards the west on the border of the City of London, about halfway out the west of London towards Heathrow Airport, and about 80 kilometres out to the west at an awful place called Slough that everyone should avoid, but it's a great place for a data centre. It challenges our optical budgets, but it works just about, and the peering points are present across all of those sites. Simply before we went into this, we ran two different peering LANs. In fact, we still do run two. The peering LAN we changed out last year was the one to the left. That was provided by Brocade. It ran about 80% of our traffic. It was a ring technology, and what this really tells you, if you look at the pink shaded areas, is that we were really running up against the limits of that technology for running an IX. We were really pretty much at the limits of the lag group sizing. That actually made capacity planning for normal or failover operation quite difficult, and a period of instability on the IX in late 2010, 2011 made that a pretty tough thing to maintain, and the service to members took a bit of a hit during that window. Just some statistics, some links to take my cue from Patrick Gilmore, who did something similar for Toronto IX yesterday. This just shows you that we ship a lot of traffic, and that we've been shipping more traffic each year. And my marketing colleague who's here, Ben Hedges, is delighted because it looks like we may have to draw a new graph down the left-hand side as we go into 2012 and 13. We're currently shipping about 1.2 terabits now through the two peering LANs, and about another 600 through private peering. So coming back to the new architecture, as I said, that we'd realised we were pretty much hitting the limits of the ring-based architecture. We probably should have changed it out earlier than we had done. In fact, before I joined Links, I only joined in March last year. The previous team had done a significant amount of design work on a new architecture. They'd look at a number of options, number of vendor possibilities, and they decided to go for a VPLS design. That had been put to the Links board and membership, and that had gained agreement as the approach in 2010. And that led to some early proof of concept work with certain vendors at the end of 2010 in preparation for the real work in 2011. So the two vendors that were shortlisted for that were Brocade as the incumbent and Juniper. That resulted in a series of proof of concept testing in Q1, and then we moved to full RFQ in Q2. The Links board agreed with our recommendation to award the contract to Juniper on the 15th of June. Bits the slide didn't say why did we choose Juniper. We were convinced through the POC testing process that the design worked. We were also impressed by the roadmap because it gave us clear signs of investment in edge and denser core technology. We could see a reduction in cost, which was important clearly to our members in terms of peering costs. And we were very interested in their sort of dense data center solutions coming up as well. We also had significant support from the highest level within Juniper. This was the first opportunity for them, and they were determined to take the opportunity and make this work. And that was reflected not just through the negotiations on the obvious things like pricing, but in the level of support that they were willing to put in to Links as one of the major global IXs. We agreed a 2-year design with them. That was to support 100% growth by the end of 2012. At the time of signing, we were now shipping about 700 gig through the then Brocade land. So this was sized to take us to about 1.4 gig by the end of 2012. And that gave us certainty on the design, but also certainty in terms of budgeting that we could afford the investment. It was initially based on Juniper's MX platform. We had earlier examples of design which we had dismissed, but we eventually came to settle on the MX with a plan that we would introduce Juniper's PTX switches, routers into the network, which we're planning to do this year. The contract agreement effectively made certain at the start this was to be a joint exercise. What we weren't going to do was buy a set of boxes and then work out ourselves how best to deploy them and then shout at Juniper if we got anything wrong. We wanted them in from the start. They were part of the high-level design through the POC. They worked through us, with us all through the phase that took us to low-level design. The testing that followed that, and all the way through the migration phase. To do that, we basically paid for Juniper professional services. That was an excellent investment. We had a particularly top guy in terms of the work that he put in with my team to get to low-level design and testing. We also had a resident engineer working with us. He was fundamental to the migration work, but also great assistance to the training of my team. We did formal training, but there's nothing obviously like hands-on and having someone alongside you to advise when things get a bit tricky. As we got through that testing work, we decided to stage all of the equipment at a staging facility. We agreed this as part of the program with Juniper and their partner within the UK. So there was a facility lined up for that. All the kit was configured, staged, and then moved out to the sites for deployment and integration into the live network. As I said, the resident engineer supported us through the migration. We also had enhanced tax support from Juniper, such that if we had any issues during migration windows, we had a direct line through to TAC. And importantly for us and our members, again, Juniper stood up to the challenge of 20% retention over 30 days of stable running after final site cutover before we paid the final bill. So just coming to the design, fairly high-level design, I admit, but effectively what you've got are 4 core sites. So the densest sites are at the north, the red and green routers there at Telehouse North and Telehouse East. About 80% of our traffic goes through those sites. At the south, we've got 2 more pairs of core switches at Telecity sites in London, at Sovereign House and Harbour Exchange. All of the edge switches in blue effectively are dual-homed into the core routers, with the exception of Telehouse, where we do use some sideways routing between the devices there that effectively allows us to manage the sheer volume of traffic we've got at those sites whilst maintaining the dual parenting. At the southern end, we also have, in fact, more recently at the Telehouse West site as well, we're running some of these as dual PE routers, although during this year the cores will become purely cores and the edge functionality will be on discrete edge devices. Again, another high-level view of the design. So there are two of the core routers in the bottom right-hand corner, the smaller southern ones at Harbour Exchange and Sovereign House. Two of the smaller sites out to west of London, which are actually running MX480s. They sit on top of Junos release 10.4 R75. We use OSPF with traffic engineering with RSVP to allow us to build the primary label paths and the standby paths, so they're basically tied in for us, and then BGP creates the single instance of peering, actually, and also a secondary case there which we can offer for multicast services. The way the link and node protection works, which presumably all of you will know even far better than me, there's the primary path, the grey arrow going from the edge switch in Telehouse North through the two cores down to the edge switch at the bottom of the diagram. There's actually two label paths that we share traffic across. In the event that we have a failure, we can switch round it in terms of link protection, the blue line, or we can go round it in terms of node protection if a node fails. And we've had several instances of this happening. It's worked perfectly. We've had no issues of where members have noticed traffic failing or failing over, apart from one which was actually our fault when we got the constraints wrong in one of the switches and black holed a small amount. But in terms of the design, it's worked perfectly. Load balancing at the edge, said we have two label paths. We actually split the traffic across the two label paths at the start, and then we split again on the lag members actually within each of the paths. We do all of that on the source and destination addresses and also the port numbers, and there's a little bit more detail about that later on. So coming to the program, the challenge for us at the start is that we're a small company. There's about 35 of us. We've got about 13 engineers, some IT people, the people that work with our members through the sales department, the member support and some support people. And we don't do stuff this big all the time. We've got some quite bright guys, but we tend to be doing small projects. So we sort of recognised this at the start. I brought in a program manager who I viewed as having a strong track record in network delivery. I purposely went for someone who understood how to build a network who happened to be a program manager rather than the other way round. It was important that we had someone who actually knew how to do what he was doing. We then did the things that you'd expect from a program. We formed a clear steering board with people in charge of areas such as design, testing, migration. The IT team were represented to make sure we had the back-end system development done on time. We built a clearly defined program. We had all of the stages laid into that I touched on earlier, the sign-off on high-level design and proof of concept, following through to low-level design, the various phases of testing such as ORT and AIS that said we were ready to go. We had the migration plan laid out over a series of maintenance windows and wrapped it up with decommissioning the old LAN, which gave us back space and cleared all of the old cabling out. We held weekly program reviews where we obviously made sure everything was on track. We assigned responsibilities, checked them, and made sure that as a team we supported each other through this all the way. We had Juniper involved in those. It wasn't just a links activity, and that made sure that all of those sign-offs were actually achieved as they should be on time. And we also built a clear communication process with links members. We set up a special website for them. We posted the program plans. We built a tool so that they could actually look to see when all of their ports were due for migration. So many members are present across many of the edge switches, so they could actually look to see when each of their ports would migrate on a specific night. In addition, I sent a weekly update effectively out to the membership, really telling them where we were, how things were going, what was on track and where we were off track, and what we were doing to bring those things back in. Program plan, which I glad to tell you I won't dwell on in huge detail. All this really just tells you there was a bunch of grouped activities that we had to achieve. It wasn't just about the land. At the top of it, you'll actually see that we had to lay additional capacity into the Brocade land to actually get us through the migration window. We started this exercise running about 600 gig through the Brocade land. By the end of it, we were up to not far short of 800, 791 gigs. So in fact, we had to plan the expansion of that network to get us through. Then we had to actually build out the transport network. We went from a ring architecture, so we had to bring a number of additional fibres in. We had to dual parent each of the edge switches. That required us to actually lay in a far more extensive optical platform than we had before. Then all of the mode stuff is all of the Juniper stuff I've told you before, the design and testing phases. The blue stuff then was making sure that all the systems that we needed, primarily around asset management, alarm monitoring, filtering, and actually being able to bill members at the end, was all in place and ready to go and worked. The green area is the migration itself, which took place over about a month from the end of September through to the end of October, and the pink bit at the bottom is the clean-up. So what did we do well? Well, the first thing is that we came in on time. We did exactly what we said we would do. We didn't suffer any unplanned downtime during the whole process. Everything completed to time within each maintenance window, with very few member tickets being raised. That was really based on the fact that close collaboration with Juniper all the way actually paid off. The design worked. It did exactly what it said it would do. My engineering team threw themselves into this. They had to learn a new architecture. They had to be trained on a platform that they hadn't actually worked on before, most of them. So during some of the phases, I had guys back doing Juniper training courses. They did a good job, showed a high level of commitment, worked as a single team. It all sounds great, but like all of these programs, we did have some issues as well. We had an early near miss. The early near miss was really down to, almost predictably, just not enough preparation. We'd gone to site. We had some optical problems during the third migration window between two of the sites. And what happened was we had 3 guys on site. There wasn't a clear person in charge. There were 3 good engineers, but therefore no one was actually in charge on the night. And in fact, we hadn't really labelled up and recorded the results on the cabling and the patching, which is boring stuff, but it has to be done. And what that meant was there was less control on the night there should have been. In fact, they recovered it. The site was left looking a bit of a mess. We had to go back and tidy it up afterwards. But there was a lot of learning from that. And the learning was the obvious stuff. You make sure that for each site there's one clear person, one of your better engineers is actually in charge, that he and his team all know what they're doing, that the preparation work before makes sure that all the cables are laid in, all the patches are ready, everything is labelled up, everything is tested, all the results are at hand, so that on the night if something goes wrong, effectively you've got a lot of reference material to work from, and you cut down the amount of time you lose when trying to restore a problem. Put that against all the stuff that we did with the staging and loading the config before. By the time we got to the final sites, our planning was meticulous. I virtually saw none of my guys in the last couple of weeks. They were all out on site. They were all doing everything I've just said. And it paid off. On the night, it was largely a cabled changeover exercise that we had to do. There were a few switches that we had to take out of racks because colo space is tight. And we had to put the new switches in, but it all worked. It came together, and it was just down to preparation and ownership in the end. We communicated well. We kept the members informed all the way through the window of what we were doing. We didn't just say to them, we've started and we've finished. We kept the ticket updated. We pointed the members to the ticket and just basically said, if you keep your eye on this, you'll see exactly where we are. What weren't we so good at? We did an appallingly bad job of managing space and power. We left everything to the last minute. We assumed 2 of the 4 core sites had sufficient space and power, and when we got to the detailed work we found that they hadn't. We were fortunate enough, we had a new site at Telehouse West, new part of the campus, that we could move one of the cores to, and one of the Telecity sites at Harbour Exchange also had enough space to move the core to. The problem with that is it actually caused an additional amount of fibre and transport costs to connect those edge sites in, and we probably lost about £100,000, $150,000 on that we should have actually had in the budget right at the start. We did that because we didn't manage our relationships also with our data centre owners properly. Some of the costing we had, some of the space management would have been better. We were pretty good at doing day-to-day stuff, but then we had sort of nowhere between ordering internal fibres and escalating something to our CEO. Our CEO loves escalations. He loves wrangling with data centre owners. He gets a great deal of fun out of it. And our objective next year is to give him far less fun than he's been having, and to take control of this ourselves. Also, our technology roadmaps really need to be more tightly tied into the plans that we have to deliver. I said before that we'd done the architecture work in 2010. There was far too long an elapsed time before we actually turned this into real activity. We also need to be better at forecasting. Again, when you're under pressure to change something out, it's easy to drop the ball on stuff like this, and you know, we need to just be a little less reactive in terms of adding capacity, working more closely with our marketing colleagues. If we do that right, we'll have the capacity in place that we need, not be quite so stretched, and we need to manage the order pipeline better. There was a couple of times in this process where we dropped the ball with a couple of members where orders should have had an answer. They should have either been provided, or we should have actually told them of an extended delay because of this work, and we just didn't do it as well as we should have done. Our communications were actually good, so I said that they can be improved. So we set the website up to manage the migration. It actually went very well. We got excellent feedback on that from members. We are pretty good at actually telling our members when we're going to do maintenances. The problem is a lot of our records aren't where they should be. They didn't always reach the right people within our members, and even when they did, they weren't passed on to the network ops centres correctly, and that resulted in some hilarious activity on the Telehouse migration, where we had the security guards trying to storm the links cages and enclosures because various members were phoning up the Telehouse team saying that something terrible was going on within Telehouse. They were losing all of their peering connections, even though we'd actually sent very clear maintenance announcements, weekly bulletins to the website up, and these were some fairly large carriers. I won't name names, but it clearly didn't work as well as it should do. So what was the final summary? Top dates I'd covered before. Programme was approved in June, completed the low-level design on the 22nd of July, but the key migration dates at the end is that we finalised the design, took it into service on the 22nd of September, started the migration on the 27th, completed it on time on the 29th of October, across 10 sites. That's the cores and the edges, obviously. 110 100 meg ports, 196 gig ports, 277 10 gig ports, 700 gig plus traffic at the end of the migration, successfully migrated without incident. So what happened along the way? War stories are always good fun. So we said that we had agreed early on to set up a staging facility. We should have checked the staging facility. Some of you may think this looks less professional than you would expect, and so did we when we saw it. It had two major problems associated with it. One is that it had insufficient power and racking, as you can see. So the racking was pallets. The power was coming off of wall sockets. We managed to kill the power supply in the partners' building. They responded to this by wheeling generators in as quickly as they could. So we had power. Now we had far too much heat. So after a short period where we sort of decided that the partner probably didn't know their arse from their elbow, we decided that evacuating this facility was a really good idea. Luckily, we had a new facility at Telehouse West, We only had a patch frame in it at the time. We very quickly had a whole host of switches in there. So effectively, this was our rack area. I think on a Thursday evening we worked closely with Telehouse, did a fantastic job with us. We had some racking ourselves. They provided us with additional racks. We laid power in very quickly overnight with these racks. We had to get equipment there. So there's a man with a pallet trolley, and he's basically about probably about 120 kilometres outside London, loading all that equipment off the pallets. That evening, they all arrived within Telehouse West, and my team and the partners' team, to be fair to them, put a fantastic effort in. Halfway through the next day, it looked like that, and in fact, we lost only a week in this. It could have been far, far worse, and we actually got the low-level design testing underway. Move on to dark fibre. You'd think there's pretty much nothing that could really go wrong with dark fibre. All we had to do was to go to a fibre partner. We ordered additional fibres to provide us with the dual site connectivity. That required us to go through some maintenance windows, which were really just about terminating fibres on patches and getting them to our comms rooms. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, we like a good riot in London, and we had an outbreak of these through the summer, and that basically killed off a number of the maintenance windows that we had to work around. Luckily, our finest chaps in the police force and fire service managed to quell the riots, and again, we absorbed that delay. Connectors. This is our wonderfully exciting MUX equipment. High functionality, as you can see there, not much that could go wrong in that, unless of course your vendor supplies you with a bunch of mouldings that aren't very strong and are brittle and tend to break. As quickly as we were connecting up some links, they were disconnecting themselves, so we had an activity to basically replace a number of these links before we could get through AIS. In fact, some of them we are now proactively changing because the vendor has advised us we should remove the whole lot, so we're going through that process now. Patching, what could possibly go wrong here? Well, what could go wrong is we could completely forget that in actual fact equipment doesn't work unless you put it in colo facilities and actually connect it back to frames and members. In fact, we missed far more than we should have done here. It was part of the problem of us managing space and power correctly. We spent about another £150,000 here that we should have captured in the budget at the start, and again is a lesson to make sure that we manage these things much better than we do. Junos, far more straightforward story, all on 10.4. We did the POC on release 1. Final testing was done on release 5. We then upgraded to release 6 to overcome a well-known Juniper BGP problem, which doesn't actually affect us because we don't use BGP other than to actually set up the VPLS service at the edge. But in terms of best practice, we thought it was best to eliminate any even tiny problems. So we moved with agreement to release 6 just before we put the network live. And then after the first night's migration, we found we had a load balancing problem on the lags, that it wasn't balancing equivalently across the lag group members. So in fact, we did a further upgrade to release 7.5 on Juniper's recommendation, which actually did clear the problem. And it looked like this. So before load balancing, you can see traffic rather unequally loaded across lag group members, and a nice little tidy pattern off to the right after we'd done that migration. In terms of Juniper capacity, I had long discussions with Ben Hedges, my marketing colleague, about how to present this. He wanted me to tell you that it was capable of world domination. I wanted to tell you that it was something slightly more realistic. So, as I said, 400 members. The original design was about 700 gig when we signed it. Current traffic across Juniper is about peaking at 1 terabit. The end design was to double that, so the design is at 1.4. If you just add up ports on the spreadsheet, then you come up with these figures. So there's a difference between what it could theoretically do if we plugged everything up and what it's actually doing at the moment. If we used every port at the edge of the network, I could produce a figure that says it would support 9.6 terabits, but I'd have to put all the cards that I have in all the slots, order some more, connect everything up to every port. I still wouldn't get all that traffic through the core because the core isn't built out. As much as that, I could do the same spreadsheeting and I could come to 3.2 terabits. to some degree, they're just things of scope that allow us to cross-check to say that, in fact, we should be able to scale this platform through this year. And in fact, what we'll do is we'll upgrade those 2 denser sites to PTX technology. We're sorting out the timing about that at the moment, and that roughly triples the capacity of our core. In essence, the message is we don't really see any obvious constraints or limits to scaling this. It's really investment and justified against the growth of member traffic. What's next for this year? Evolving that design, as I said, bringing the PTX in. We've got some fabric upgrades to do on the MX, which allows us to make use of the line card capacity fully. At the moment, we don't use all 16 ports. My CEO wants us to launch a 100 gig service before the Olympics, just to make my life slightly more difficult, so I'm finding a way of agreeing how we do that with him. This is going to, this upgrade really, all of these drive a further review of our transport layer later this year, so we'll be doing some more work on that. We lost S-Flow when we went to Juniper, unfortunately, so we're going to re-implement that. A number of our members do make use of that to monitor their traffic and peering relationships. So we have a commitment for an early release in the second half of this year, but full release in 2013. And in 2013, the things that we can see at the moment is probably the upgrade of the southern parts of the core to a smaller variant of the PTX. We're looking with Juniper at Q-Fabric for the really dense sites, but that's very early in the discussion, and whilst it gives us some benefits in terms of density, actually tying it into this overall architecture is a challenge which we haven't solved yet with them. And that is everything I can tell you. So thank you. If you've got any questions, I'll try my best to answer, and I'm told I have an army of Juniper helpers hiding somewhere out there who will pick up anything I can't answer.
We can take a couple of quick questions if anyone has anything. Okay. Thanks, Dirk.
Thank you.
Do you have LJ from Cisco?